Well, here she is, the 2024 RC390. Today we're going to be focusing on these levers. Stock levers, they're not too bad, but we got something much better in store. As you can see, we got a really nice quality lever here. You know, one thing I always loved about opening up Vortex levers was just the packaging. You know, they make it really easy. But here's the lever actually out of the box, and you can just tell the quality and the machining is really nice. You know, you don't see too many tooling marks. It's a very smooth edge compared to a lot of different levers. And the thing is too, they don't have the bends and the breaks and the adjustableness in the actual lever itself, which is actually really much, you know, a weak point. I've actually had levers, you know, split in half as I'm riding down the road, and you grab the clutch and then half your lever's missing. So it's really nice. And this is the long version. They do make short levers, which are, you know, usually about an inch shorter. I mean, just listen to this adjuster. It's very stout spring. This isn't going to get bumped easily and pop out of place like some of the cheaper ones do. And I have a great example I'll show later in the video about how the cheap levers perform compared to these, but it's just such a beautiful, beautiful lever.
There's the lever at position 6. As you can see, I can push it a tad more past. That will happen while riding, and then all of a sudden the brake lever can be pulled way closer, and with gloves on, that will hit my knuckle before the brake starts really engaging. Very dangerous.
So here's the pieces that you'll get when you open up your Vortex levers. Here's a little spring. You got your spring, you got your bushing, you got your bolt, and you'll have your nut on the other side, which is floating around somewhere. And you got your adapter plate. So all these levers are the same, but what really is the key difference between bikes is this adapter plate, adapter block, as you'd call it. And this is where your lever gets converted to fit your specific bike. And the assembly goes the same for all of them. So I like to do grease on all the pivots, grease the bushing real well, pop that down in there, focus in, there we go. And then you'll end up putting the spring down in that little hole there, and then sliding it in there and just making sure that spring ends up right there in that little divot. And then you just pop your bolt on through, and you'll be able to put the nut on the other side. And they include this handy dandy little wrench, if you want to call it that. A normal 8mm socket will not fit down in there, and you'll see once I get this lever assembled, as I need 2 hands for it. This really makes a difference, so you can tighten down that lever, so then you don't end up getting a whole bunch of slop up and down, because that gets pretty annoying when you go to grab the lever and you can feel it moving around. So we're gonna get that nice and tight. So here we're gonna get this whole lever assembled. Now this is the clutch side. As you see, we got the little cutout for the cable. So what I typically do is I get a paper towel, a little bit of grease going here. Let's get that coated. And this is a very crucial step. A lot of people actually, I see come through my local shop as I'm working on their bikes, and they will miss the bushing, and their levers will be flopping all around, and they'll feel terrible. So make sure you get that bushing, make sure you get greased. Get a little grease off my hands here. It's definitely a little bit of a messy job to do it right. And then go ahead, make sure we have our bolt. So we're gonna drop down a little spring into the divot there. Once that's in, I'm just gonna make sure that bushing's flush with our adapter plate there. Pull that in. Now, this is where you're gonna have to just push that spring right into the slot right there. And then you're gonna have to fight the spring pressure a little bit, and then sometimes it helps to play with that adjuster, but I was able to get that right there and pop that bolt in. Now, we got that assembly. So now we got a nylon lock nut, which is really nice, so we know that's not going anywhere. I'm gonna go ahead, wipe that little excess grease off the threads. Don't want that on there. Go ahead, get this little guy on there. Now this is where that tool comes in real handy. You'll see. So right now, you could get a wrench on that, you could get a socket. But it's not until we start getting it actually tightened up on there. You're gonna need a 4 mil Allen key, and you can do most of it pretty easily. So you start really hitting that nylon. And it's really good because you know that this isn't gonna come undone when you're riding, and then you're not gonna lose your lever. That's where it just gets snug. So we might need to touch that up a little bit later, but you don't want to over tighten it because 1, you can strip your little tool out. 2, you won't be able to move your settings on your adapter. If you crush that down too much, it's not going to pivot, so you won't be able to use your adjuster. But that's pretty much it to get it set up, and then we'll move to the install on the bike. And this is the same with the brake lever as well. It's just a slightly different look on the adapter plate, but it all goes together the same way. And obviously you don't want to get the 2 levers mixed up. You want to make sure your adjuster ends up on top and not flipped around so you can actually use it. This isn't necessary on every bike, but this one I'm going to have to loosen up these 2 lock nuts here so we can let this cable shroud move closer, giving us more slack in this cable, so then we can get the clutch cable end off of the clutch lever up top. So I'm going to do that real quick. It's really easy. You just break the lock nut free, and then you loosen up this nut right here, and then the cable can float, and you'll see up there we'll get a lot more slack. So with a 12 and 14 mil, I was able to hold this nut, break this one loose. So now run that back all the way, and now you just run back that nut, and now the shroud can move forward, allowing us to have way more play. See? So to give us even more play, I'm gonna just zip these 2 bolts out real quick, and this allows this whole perch to move way more, and we'll get a lot more slack. I want to take a moment to also note the profile. As you can see, we got a much more drastic dip, and then it curves back out. When the Vortex has a much smoother transition. You see right here, it's just a little smoother. It's not as aggressive right here. So that allows you to have your fingers placed all along here and be pretty even compared to the stock lever. Just not as inviting, especially if you have the lever out more. As you get a wider grip on the bars, this starts moving out more and more when this stays pretty consistent. Now, got both surfaces lightly covered in grease, and just on the edge there, focus in, right on that spindle per se. So we'll go ahead, get this baby situated. Right in there. You just want to go snug. Because remember, we have the lock nut that's going to hold it in place. Get our cable, put a little fresh grease on the end there. So I went ahead, zipped these 2 bolts back in, tighten them up by hand. Just go snug, You don't need to go crazy. And then you don't want to run these back down. Now, you gotta be careful. You gotta set the slack properly. Make sure your adjuster's turned in almost all the way because you want to have your play on the fly. So, still see we got some room to go. You want to be able to have about that much play before you actually start pulling on the clutch. About enough to put like a quarter or a penny in there. Now there's an actual spec for it of like, 2 mil or something, but I just make sure there's a little bit there so you're not pulling on the clutch and then accidentally engaging it. So we got a little bit more. So all we do is come down here and we'll tighten this nut, which might be able to be done by hand. Yeah, would you look at that? Give this a couple turns, come back up here and keep checking. So I'm gonna get that dialed in. Once that's dialed in, I'm gonna hold that big nut and then snug this lock nut up against it, and then we'll be done down here and everything else is finished up there. All right, got the nut all tied down over there. Let's see, we actually got the desired amount. So with that being said, we'll just run down this lock nut, lock ring, whatever you want to call it, against the perch. Just go a little. I get in there with the tool just so it doesn't come loose, because you can do finger tight, but they'll sometimes back themselves off. You can even put a flat head screwdriver in there and give it just a little tweak, but these work pretty good. Now we finish it off. Look at this. Look at that clearance. They designed this lever so well. I thought it was gonna hit. It doesn't hit. That's perfect. That just, it's just beautiful. Like, look at that lever. And I prefer the long ones just because I ride with a really wide grip. So I wanna be able to reach the levers. Now, some people prefer the shorties, and I really think that's the perfect lever length for this bike. But it's all subject to your opinion. But man, does that look good. Let's go ahead and do the brake lever. That should be way easier. Look at that. So nice. So even at the closest position, you still got 4 fingers, and like you got to pull. And by the time it's contacting the grip, it's just barely kissing it right there. So I don't know anyone that wants their lever this close. So I'm gonna probably end up be somewhere out there, maybe even all the way out. I'm gonna have to ride, get it set up, get the angle set on my levers too, but man, does that just match that orange?